Guys, I'm finally done. I just finished an orchestral transcription of the main theme from the Inazuma area of Genshin Impact. It is easily the biggest transcription project I have ever taken on. I tried to transcribe what every instrument in the orchestra is playing in this masterwork, and it probably took a JRPG and a half to complete. Now, why would I bother doing this? In jazz, transcription is when a musician tries to write down every note of another musician's solo by listening to the recording very carefully over and over again. The idea is that by listening to the recording so many times and devoting so much close attention to it, the player subconsciously absorbs some of the ideas and gets them under their fingers. Transcribing someone's work is the ultimate sign of respect. It says, I want to sound like you. This is one of the first solos I ever transcribed. When I do orchestral transcription, like the one I did for the orchestral arrangement of Kyome no Nami, the goal is to understand the various figures going on and the instruments that the composer decided to assign to each of those figures. And that's exactly what my goal was with this project. So without further ado, the goal of this video will be to share my learnings from transcribing Yupeng Chen's Inazuma. We will, of course, get into some of the crazy cool harmony that Chen employs in this piece. We'll be joined by my friend Ryan Leach for a discussion of the orchestration. And finally, we'll be joined by Zac Zinger for a discussion of some of the considerations that go into writing for traditional Japanese instruments. Let's first take a look at some harmony. Tertiary substitution. Okay, so it might seem like an odd place to start, but I think that in order to understand the more advanced chord choices from this song, we should start with the B section, which is taken by woodwinds and koto. So we're going along in very familiar territory with a couple of minor 2-5-1s until we get to measure 27, where we have an E minor going to a D flat half diminished. Now, where did D flat half diminished come from? I've not yet found any formal terminology for this concept, but in my community, we call this technique tertiary substitution. Have you ever noticed how D minor 7 has an F chord in it? Or furthermore, how D minor 9 has an F major 7 in it. In the key of C major, D minor is considered the 2 chord and F major is considered the 4 chord. And both of these chords are considered predominant chords. They want to lead toward the 5 chord, toward G. Well, if we extend D minor into D minor 7, the resulting chord is now a D minor and an F major. Here I'm kind of building on this fundamental building block of Western harmony in which we tend to build our chords by alternating major thirds and minor thirds, which is called tertiary harmony. We build a D minor triad first with a minor third from D to F, and then with a major third from F to A. If we want to continue extending to make a D minor 7, we add another minor third from A to C. Tertiary substitution is this observation that because D minor 7 and F major 7 have so many common tones, they will have similar voice leading behavior. Still thinking about it in C, you might notice how A minor, the 6th chord, C major, the 1 chord, and E minor, the 3 chord, have this same relationship. And it's no coincidence that these 3 chords all belong to the tonic family. The 2 dominant function chords in C, G, the 5 chord, and B diminished, the diminished 7 chord, have this same relationship. Stated generally, we can take any triad and then add a bass note, a major or minor third below that triad, and the resulting chord will have similar voice leading behavior. So instead of extending the branches of the chord, so to speak, by adding another third on top of it, we can extend the roots of a chord by adding another third below it. Kind of cool, huh? So with all that said, I want to point out how we can think of D flat half diminished as E minor over D flat. So it has an E minor triad in it. So we took an E minor triad and we added a bass note a minor third below. Because of this, we can substitute one for the other even though D flat half diminished is firmly not in the key. It's non-diatonic in this case, but the number of common tones with E minor is so high that it makes for a smooth transition. Two more tertiary movements here too. This technique is important to identify because Chen uses it in several other places in the piece. With that established, let's head on over to the A section. In measure 9, where B augmented leads into an A minor can be thought of as a tertiary substitution for C. And of course we know that B augmented leads smoothly into C because it has two chromatic neighbors and one common tone. Augmented and diminished chords. Now that we're looking at the A section, I wanted to point out all the cool uses of augmented chords. First we have that B augmented we've discussed in measure 9. Then we have two instances of our spicy friends, the Blackadder chord. These chords are really effective for creating tension and getting us to new places in the key. There's a G augmented over F in measure 11. And an E flat augmented over D flat in measure 16. Notice how in both instances Chen is resolving a cadence and then introducing tension right away to keep the progression moving. So the pattern is 2-5-1 and then tension chord. And in this case, that tension chord is the relevant Blackadder chord. We see this pattern again in measures 38 through 39, but this time the tension chord selected is a diminished seventh chord a half step above the root. Okay, so that's it for the harmony for this song. I could be here forever talking to you about chords. Orchestration. In order to properly cover the orchestration from this piece, I invited my friend Ryan Leach, a fellow composer and YouTuber who has a lot of expertise on the subject. I am so glad I talked to him about this because he had such golden insights to share. I'm sure you're all familiar with him, but if you're not, I would strongly recommend that you go and check out his channel. In fact, we did a video together a while back about the Ghibli sound, which you might enjoy. Alright.
I had a lot of thoughts about just what makes successful orchestration and good principles, things that are just done in a way that I'd be like, yeah, you should do that too. That's good writing. So one thing that stands out to me is even though there's kind of different dramatic moods, but there are many places where it's rather gentle. And even in those gentle places, there's constant rhythmic activity. Something is moving or pulsing, doing stuff at all times. I mean, you just look at the page. Everybody's busy working, doing stuff. Sometimes it might be harps, sometimes it might be little trills or tremolos. And I'm talking about not even the melodic line, just background parts that you're always feeling the pulse, which I think is so important to keeping it feeling moving and alive.
Like even in this B section here where it's only the woodwinds and it's a lot lower energy, we've still got 30 seconds on the page, we've still got triplets on the page. Everyone's busy, right?
Everyone's busy. It's never just a pad and a melody, with just like whole notes going under it. Bar 24 here, these chords in the clarinets, you could write them as a pad. That's how you figure out your voicings, but then actually going in and being like, okay, bop, 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 bop. Makes it so, again, alive and moving. I consider this under rhythm too, is the melody is very embellished and ornamented. Grace notes and these little runs and flourishes and things. Whenever we have melody, it has personality because of those little extra things.
Those idiomatic embellishments really help to give it a lot of character.
Yeah, it helps using the traditional instruments because we just kind of expect that sound. But even on the strings or even on the oboe, we still get it. Exactly. Yeah. I've noticed whenever he blends colors on the melody, they're very distinct. So it's not like you have like an English horn doubled with a bassoon. It's like the shakuhachi and the violins are doubled together. And so you still very clearly hear them. And I think a lot of beginners think when you are blending colors, you're trying to get power and volume. You're like, oh, I want my melody to be louder. So the English horn, let's add a bassoon, let's add a clarinet. And but what you end up doing is just making it kind of gray, just like kind of vague woodwind. And instead, when you have the shakuhachi and the violins, it's like, I can hear them both very richly. Like, so they're enhancing each other, but they're so distinct.
Shakuhachi, violins 1 and 2, and then we team up shakuhachi and violins 1 and 2. Mm-hmm. So we got this, that, and now they're together. For the next section, it's koto, then oboe and koto.
They're not in the same family at all. So the intention was definitely not to try to trick you into thinking that's one magical obokoto.
Each of the colors is really distinct, and we have this background of like, here's peanut butter, here's chocolate, here's peanut butter and chocolate.
Right.
You got peanut butter on my chocolate.
Well, you got chocolate in my peanut butter.
Bravissimo.
Something I think kind of on the opposite of that I think is really interesting is that the harmonic support very often comes from the same family as the melody. My thinking, I think, always used to be like, okay, melody and harmony, you want them to contrast. So melody is going to be on the strings and harmony is going to be on the woodwinds. Melody's on the oboe, I'll give the harmony to the French horns. But that's not what happens here. Like the melody's on the oboe and the harmony support is on clarinet, space, clarinet, bassoon. When the melody's on the flugelhorn, the harmonic support is in the French horns. And when it's in the violins, the harmonic support is coming from the strings. For some reason, that feels counterintuitive to me, but it works. I don't know why that feels to me a newer observation, but now I see it all the time. Now that I'm aware of it, I'm like, oh yeah, this is just a good technique. Keeping families together.
Traditional family values.
The other thing too is that usually the harmonic support is given to a family. These violins could be taken out. They're not doubling, we don't have violas and cellos doubling those French horn parts as well. Because again, it's that bland color. In this piece, if the harmony is given to woodwinds, it's given to the woodwinds. Anybody else who's playing is doing like rhythmic stuff. If the harmony is given to the French horns, then anybody else in that register is kind of like staying out of the way because that's their job.
Sure.
That thing of blending colors just makes everything kind of too neutral. And so much of the power of the richness and all of the different flavors is by keeping them distinct in their moments.
That switch from flugelhorn to piccolo trumpet is a really cool shift in register for everyone. Violins go away. We just have harp, French horn, and the flutes come in.
I think that flute line, you kind of focus on it and you get pulled away from the melody, especially as it reaches the high register. You're kind of like, oh, I know what that trumpet's doing, but oh, what about those flutes? That's interesting. I think it's really significant that he saved that for, this is like the 4th, 5th time we've heard this melody. So now it's safe to distract us with like counterlines and things. I don't think that would have been as effective if that was the first time through the melody.
Right when it's holding this last note, we spare no time to like, okay, now the harp does a crazy harmonic
Right,
thing.
yeah.
Crunch frickin' tastic.
The thing I think is interesting here is the absence of the high woodwinds on that ostinato when the violins come back in for the melody. And it clears the stage. Like, let's get that high color, that high register stuff out of the way for a second, clear the stage. Okay, cool. I hear violin ones come in, do their thing. After that bar, we kind of know, okay, the end of the phrase, it's going to rest. Then we can bring that ostinato back in. I think people have a tendency to be like, here's my ostinato, and then just hit loop. People are afraid of that emptiness. They're like, here's my ostinato, and if I take it away, it's going to feel like empty and it disappeared, and it's going to feel weird and disjointed, right? To like have it come in and come out and come in and come out. But I don't think that's the actual listener's experience. The listener's experience is like, oh, there's the violins now. Oh, there's the flutes again. You know, like we're just kind of following whatever's interesting. I don't think we're left with that choppy feel that I think people are afraid of getting when they rest.
It reminds me almost of sidechain compression. Whenever the main melody is playing, flute and piccolo, please shut up. And then whenever its level goes down, yeah, you can come back.
Right. Yeah, exactly. There's a threshold. This is the important part of the phrase. Okay, the phrase is pretty much over. Come back. Yeah, totally. There are a lot of parallels with orchestration and mixing.
Which is crazy. If you learn producing first or mixing first, you're like, what? They were doing this in the 1700s?
Right. Thinking about like high versus low frequencies and all this stuff. Yeah, right.
Totally. A bonus observation I'll add here is that the flute and piccolo are in parallel fifths. Here he's using the technique to highlight the major 7 and sharp 11 of the chord. We also heard this technique in Legend of Ashitaka from Princess Mononoke, and in general, I would consider it a reference to the parallel fifths used in various East Asian musical traditions.
So the only other thing that really stood out to me as just kind of a main general principle is the range of dynamics, that there's big loud moments and there's really quiet moments, and that's so important in keeping it going. Measure 22, this koto clarinet section is such a relief. Like, look at how empty the page suddenly gets, right?
Yeah.
That's huge. That's important. We get so gently placed into it, easing down, and then we settle onto it.
Totally. This wabadabwa, like a modified Mitsuda lick, like it's also the Pokemon thing. There's like 6 or 7 examples of this. Some of these harp runs feel at least self-referential to other game titles. This like Diminished run felt a little like Great Fairy's Fountain. It's hard to hear any arpeggio on harp of like a major 7 chord without thinking Final Fantasy.
This actually reminded me a lot of Ori and the Blind Forest. You know, there's all these different percussion colors making this really rich, thick texture. And it made me think of that soundtrack.
It's so delicate.
This is a good chart. This is a handy. In some ways, this here is more useful a study analysis technique for general stuff than like getting really too deep into the weeds. Like if you built one of these for a dozen pieces, you would probably learn a lot about structuring a piece and unfolding a theme and contrast of colors and all this stuff.
Why play music when we can think about it instead? All right, now let's talk about shakuhachi for a while. Traditional Japanese instruments. As a final angle to view this piece from, we're going to talk about writing for traditional Japanese instruments. This piece incorporates several of these instruments played by top players. Shakuhachi played by Mamino Yorita, taiko drums played by the Kodo Drum Ensemble, koto played by Kasumi Watanabe, and shamisen played by Yutaka Oyama. For this part, I had the pleasure of talking to fellow game composer and shakuhachi expert Zac Zinger. Zac is renowned for his deep knowledge of the shakuhachi, both in a traditional context and in contemporary music. In fact, he was the shakuhachi soloist with the Hollywood Chamber Orchestra for the Inazuma portion of the 2022 Genshin concert, Melodies of an Endless Journey.
She's been a certified master since she was like 15 or 16 or something. So
Really? Oh my gosh.
yeah, she's in like all the styles too. So she's a phenomenal player. It's interesting that she chose to use a 1.8 shakuhachi. So that's the standard size shakuhachi, 1.8. It's about 1.5 feet. Shakuhachi stands for the ancient unit of measurement shaku, which is about a foot. And the length is 1.8 shaku. So hachi. The full name would be like Ishaku Hasun. But we have bigger and smaller shakuhachis. So like this is a 2.4.
Oh wow.
And this one's aluminum, but it's a 1.6. But we still call them shakuhachis because this is the standard size.
That's not a shakuroku?
No, we don't call it that. I was a little surprised that she used the 1.8. It puts her in E minor, which the 1.8 is in D minor if you just have the open holes. Now, E minor isn't too hard to play by using the half holes and stuff. So, and especially a player of her caliber, it's just as easy, really. She might have gotten a little more resonance if she used a 1.6. Now, she definitely has a 1.6, so it was a conscious decision. If you play it on a 1.6, that first phrase, you start on A, which is part of the D minor pentatonic, so then you slide up to the D. And then you have to do this action where you're like covering, you're kind of staying on the same hole and covering for A and then half holing for B. So that's a little harder than if I was playing on 1.6, which is a whole step down. I could just use this finger. That last note, you get to use that big fat, that we call it Rho, the lowest note. You get a lot of brightness out of that one, a lot of resonance rather than a little softer because you have a half hole. 2.4, when you want to get lower notes, 2.4 is essentially an alto flute. It transposes the exact same way. So it's an A minor pentatonic. And in fact, for one of the things I recorded on the concert, Desire for Calm is what it's called. And that's simply too low for the 1.8 to play. So I use this one. If you want to avoid making impossible parts on shakuhachi, keep it to the pentatonic scale that the key is in, and then you'll be fine. Add 3 flats or 3 sharps on either side of the key, and it's generally safe for a professional player. From C, probably 3 flats or 3 sharps. So F, B flat, E flat are all pretty comfortable keys.
Okay.
And then C, G, D, and A are all pretty comfortable keys. But that being said, in the traditional music, we still use a ton of half holes. Like one of the major scales is. That's using B flats and E flats, which are the hardest notes to play.
Why do you think that the whole bores weren't based on that and were based on minor pentatonic?
That's a great question. It's a little bit of a mystery why we call that the Miyako Bushi scale. 1 flat 2, 4, 5, flat 6, if we're talking in Western terms, but they never thought of it that way. What they call the Minyo scale is the minor pentatonic scale. Minyo is like the folk music of Japan. Originally it was being played in the gagaku context, which is the court music of Japan. But that was way back in like the 8th century. Then it like disappeared for a few centuries, came back like the 13th, 14th century. It used to have 6 holes, and when it came back as hitoyogiri, it only had 5 holes. And that's when we got that pentatonic scale. The traditional music, the honkyoku, which is the sort of monk Zen music, is largely using different modes of the Miyako Bushi scale. Samurais would carry these hitoyogiri around and they'd just play them on the road, I guess. But people would be singing things. I would expect the shakuhachi was accompanying them in one way or another, and that's where that came from. So there was a sect called the Fuke sect of Buddhism, and rather than doing zazen, which is sitting meditation, like on your knees on the ground, they would do, and chanting sutras, they would do suizen, so blowing zen. So they would play shakuhachi in place of sutras for their meditation practice. The government was very controlling at that time over who could cross from region to region. They were the only people allowed to play shakuhachi. And second, they had very special permission to cross over from region to region. They wore these tengai, these basket hats. They would go and they were basically begging, busking. So these tengai they'd wear on their heads were ostensibly to separate themselves from the material world and make it not about the performer, but about the sound and the meditation. But samurais started to join this cult, and the government asked them to spy on people, as they were anonymous with the tengai, and they were roaming from place to place. They could spy and report back to the government. So that's how they had this kind of symbiotic relationship with the government, up until the Meiji era, when they just said, no more of that, we don't want anything Japanese anymore, and shakuhachi itself was banned for like 4 years. Right at the beginning, that very first thing that she plays is called suriage, the slide up. That's something that's really idiomatic to the shakuhachi.
Whoa.
You can basically make it into a slide whistle if you want to. Go nuts with that. Shakuhachi players love that stuff. One of the pieces that I did play is called In the Strange Realm of Sakura, which is definitely based on like Sakura, the famous Japanese folk song. So it goes like this. Now, none of those articulations were written. And if you have a skilled shakuhachi player who's studied in the music, they should know exactly what to put in there. Well, because it's an end-blown flute, you can get this really cool pitch vibrato. And why wouldn't you use that? You can manipulate pitch with both your fingers and with the head angle. Mary Kari. Those staccato notes, you typically wouldn't use your tongue at all with the shakuhachi. So on like Western flute, you would commonly go, but on shakuhachi, you use your fingers to re-articulate things. And when you start notes, you don't ever go. What we do is it's called atari for attack. So the idea is you're striking the hole to re-articulate the note. So that thing?
Yeah, it sounds so idiomatic. It's like,
yeah,
oh, that's a shakuhachi.
If you listen to any honkyoku, you're going to hear this phrase.
That's where I've heard it.
Yeah, I mean, if you put a shakuhachi player in a studio and you're like, play shakuhachi, that's probably the first thing they're going to do. Just like learning a language, the more you immerse yourself in that music, the more that feeling will come across in what you write or what you play, if authenticity is what you're going for. But I also don't want to discourage like the avant-garde composer who sees possibilities in the shakuhachi, might not know much about Japanese music, but sees possibilities in the instrument that you might be able to do with another instrument. That's also awesome. You know, we're not living in Edo period Japan. You don't have to just write honkyoku.
And with that, we'll wrap up our discussion about Genshin Impact's Inazuma. Big thanks to Ryan and Zac for providing your expert perspectives, and to Tomiharu for his help finishing up the transcription. Most of all, thank you, dear viewer, for sticking around for the entirety of this video essay. You know the deal. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to subscribe, sign up for my Patreon, or join the Discord server associated with this channel. I also have a couple game composition projects in the pipeline, so be sure to follow me on social for updates on that. And until next time, じゃあね.